This bargain no longer works. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration.
So, what you just saw was the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney at the World Economic Forum, and according to him, the world that we have lived in our entire lives is currently in the midst of a rupture. So, after World War II, we have been living under what we would call a pleasant fiction. It was this belief that the world ran on a fair, rules-based system where international law applied to everyone equally. Deep down, everyone knew that this wasn't entirely true. We have seen powerful nations ignore the rules whenever it suited them, but we played along because it was a useful compromise. In exchange for our cooperation, we got a stable global financial system and a security umbrella that kept us safe. But the era is ending. Today, instead of trade bringing us together, the world's greatest powers are using finance and supply chains as weapons and causing the global system to break apart. To make sense of this, we can turn to Ray Dalio's framework of the changing world order. In his research, Dalio identifies a pattern that every major empire has followed for the last 500 years. It is a cycle driven by debt, internal conflict, and external competition. We saw it with the Dutch Empire in the 1700s, which dominated global trade until it overextended its military and saw the Dutch guilder lost its status as the world's reserve currency. We saw it again with the British Empire, which reached its peak in the 1800s, but eventually collapsed under the weight of its massive war debts and the rise of the United States. And right now, we are in the late stage of the American cycle. This is the phase where the empire has reached its peak and is now struggling with its massive debt, internal division, and the rise of a powerful rival. In fact, you can see this shift happening in real time. For a while now, central banks and sovereign wealth funds around the world have been reducing their exposure to the US dollar. And over the past 3 years, this trend has accelerated. This turning point came after the Russia-Ukraine invasion in 2022, when the United States froze over $300 billion of Russia's foreign reserves. This sends a clear message to every nation. If your money is digital and held in a foreign system, it can be turned off at any moment. This is why we are now seeing a historic dump of the US treasuries. Countries are no longer treating the dollar as a safe haven. Instead, they are now pivoting to a hard currency, gold. For the first time since 1996, gold has actually surpassed US treasuries as the world's largest foreign reserve asset. And the numbers are staggering. Central bank gold purchases are now averaging over 1,000 tons a year, which is more than twice their pre-2022 levels. This massive demand, combined with concerns over US debts and new tariff threats, have pushed gold above $5,000 per ounce for the first time in history. Quick pause. If you are looking for the best brokers to kickstart your investing journey, check out Interactive Brokers. You will enjoy one of the lowest fees in the industry at just 35 cents per trade on the US stock market. It also offers Ireland domiciled ETFs, perfect for saving on dividend withholding taxes. Plus, it also comes with free company research tools, so you can make smarter investing decisions. Feel free to use my Interactive Brokers link to open an account and start investing today. Alright, let's get back to the video. But how did the US even get this much power to begin with? It all started with the Monroe Doctrine in 1823. This was a cornerstone of US foreign policy. It declared that the Western Hemisphere was closed to any more European colonization. It also warned that if Europe tried to intervene, the US would see it as a hostile act. Essentially, the US drew a line in the sand and claimed half of the planet as its own sphere of influence. Even today, we see this doctrine coming into play. For example, during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, the US used this logic to justify a naval blockade, effectively stopping Soviet missiles from entering their hemisphere. Another example was the 1954 Guatemalan coup, where the US orchestrated the overthrow of a democratically elected government because they feared that it was becoming a foothold for foreign influence. We also saw this in the 1989 invasion of Panama, where 27,000 US troops were deployed to oust Manuel Noriega and secure the Panama Canal. More recently, We saw it in the January 2026 raid on Venezuela and the capture of its president, Nicolas Maduro, which was justified as a law enforcement action to protect the hemisphere from narco-terrorism. We even saw it in the recent US pressure to annex Greenland, where the Arctic was treated as just another part of the American backyard that needed to be secured from Russian and Chinese influence. Then, after 1947, this policy expanded through the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. The US moved away from staying in its own backyard and decided to help rebuild the world. By sending billions of dollars to help Europe recover from World War II, they did more than just to fight communism. They effectively turned the US dollar into the world's reserve currency. And for the next 80 years, the dollar was the mandatory tool for global trade. If you wanted to buy oil or even basic food supplies, you needed dollars. In exchange, the US would provide the world with a security umbrella where they would use their navy to keep the ocean trade routes safe. And they provided a stable financial system that everyone could use. However, that old bargain has now collapsed. What used to be a deal of use our money and we will protect the system has now shifted into something much more aggressive. Follow our rules or we will unplug you from the world. The security and stability that were once guaranteed are now being used as leverage, and as a result, the very nations that relied on that umbrella are now looking for their own way out. In January 2026, Prime Minister Mark Carney signed a major strategic partnership with China. Under this agreement, China would slash its tariffs on Canadian canola, while Canada opens its doors to Chinese electric vehicles at a low tariff. We also saw UK Prime Minister heading to Beijing to build what he calls a pragmatic and consistent partnership. He made it clear that sticking our heads in the sand was no longer an option, and pretending that China does not matter would be reckless. Meanwhile, the EU has signed a massive free trade agreement with China. This deal was hailed as the mother of all deals, which creates a free trade zone of 2 billion people and slashes tariffs on everything from European cars to Indian machinery. At the same time, the EU is also pushing for the immediate implementation of the Mercosur deal with South American giants like Brazil and Argentina, with the hopes of creating one of the world's largest free trade zones, independent of US influence. Even the military landscape is shifting towards self-reliance. At the 2025 Hague Summit, European NATO members made a historic commitment to increase their defense spending from 2% to 5% of GDP by 2035 because they realized that they can no longer rely on a single partner for survival. As Mark Carney has warned at Davos, this new world of fortress will likely be poorer and more fragile because trade is no longer efficient. However, it will be a world where nations are becoming more independent. Now, of course, while Western nations have been busy preparing themselves for the changing world order, China has not been idle either. For decades, the world has viewed China as a source of cheap labor, but that era is now long gone. China has now strategically moved to eliminate its own dependency on Western technology while simultaneously building chokeholds on the West. Today, China dominates rare earth supplies while controlling roughly 70% of the world's medicine precursors. These are essential ingredients for everything from basic antibiotics to advanced cancer treatments. By cornering these markets, China has ensured that the West cannot simply unplug from them without facing a total economic and social collapse. This physical control is backed by a massive leap in tech. Recent reports from early 2026 show that China now leads the US in 66 out of 74 critical technologies, ranging from high-speed computing to advanced sensors. Then there's the rise of Project Bridge. This digital payment system has already processed over $55 billion in transactions. It allows banks to settle trades instantly using their own local digital currencies while bypassing the US dollar and the SWIFT system entirely. This effectively removes the West's most powerful weapon, financial sanctions, while providing an alternative for any nation that's looking to step out of the US system. At the same time, Beijing is rebranding itself as the world's responsible mediator, from brokering truces in Myanmar to de-escalating tensions in the Middle East. China is pioneering a strategy known as mediation from afar. Unlike the American approach of the last few decades, which often relied on costly military interventions and forever wars that drained the national treasury, China's method is transactional and pragmatic. They use economic incentives like infrastructure investments and trade guarantees to stabilize borders and secure wider trade routes. By positioning itself as a neutral partner that values stability over regime change, China isn't just seeking peace. It is seeking diplomatic legitimacy. The message to the world is clear. While the West provides lectures on democracy, China provides the tools for development. This approach allows them to expand their influence globally without the military entanglements that have exhausted the previous superpower. So, what does this mean for you and me? According to Ray Dalio, the current dollar-centric monetary system is now showing the same cracks that we saw in the early 1970s. As government debt starts to act like plague in the government's circulatory system, holding your wealth in just one currency or in government debts has become a massive risk. To hedge against this, Dalio suggests a hard asset allocation of 5% to even 15% in gold. Unlike stocks or bonds, gold carries no counterparty risk. It can't be frozen, and it doesn't depend on the government's promise to pay you back or a bank's ability to stay solvent. However, protecting your wealth is about more than just what you own. It is also about where your assets are located. Dalio warns that the next decade will be defined by the erosion of purchasing power as governments print more money to finance unsustainable debts. To survive this, he believes that it is essential to diversify internationally and move away from a total concentration in any one country. However, despite the changing world order, Dalio remains optimistic about technology and innovation, as technology is one of the key forces driving or responding to the changing world order. But what about crypto? While Dalio has become more open to Bitcoin as a speculative hedge, he remains much more confident in gold as a long-term store of value. He maintains that if you do decide to hold crypto, it should only be a small slice of your portfolio. This sentiment is shared by BlackRock, who found that even a 1% to 2% allocation to crypto can increase the portfolio risk by 2 to 5%. Okay, the takeaway is this. Today, we are witnessing the closing chapter of the world as we knew it. For nearly 80 years, the global system relied on a bargain where the United States provide the currency and protection, and the rest of the world played by those rules. But that bargain has now expired and is replaced by a world of fortress economies where each nation prioritizes their own survival and self-reliance over global cooperation. For you and me, this means that the strategies that have once worked in the past, like keeping all our savings in one currency or relying on a single country for our future, are now getting riskier. The rupture or changing world order or whatever it is isn't something to fear, but it is something to keep in mind. With the era of global trust ending, a new era of strategic independence will come. By moving away from paper wealth and towards assets and skills that have real-world utility, we can navigate this transition. History shows that world orders always change, and while we can't stop the cycle, we can certainly choose how we prepare for the new world that is already being built.